Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always, told out of Voice of Radio. So today we need to take a look at a new Banette. A new Banette which could be a lot of fun. And this new Shuppet sticking his tongue out. It's single energy 20. It's the kind of thing I look at it now and I'm like, oh, you know what? Turn one going second. I'm like, no, wait. That's TCG Pocket. That's not the real TCG. Sorry about that. Not a good card playability-wise, but oh my word, Mickey Kudo here. Absolutely crushing it with the artwork. That Shuppet looks adorable. It's not a particularly good card. Sorry. But it does look adorable. As a side note, obviously we have the Shuppet from Scarlet and Violet base. So that's by far the better Shuppet. Same retreat cost, same weakness, same HP. All the relevant things are the same. The difference is you've got a single energy attack that does 10, and then flip a coin if heads your opponent can't play item cards from their hand. So make no mistake about it. Now next year we're going to hit a rotation, and we're going to lose the Scarlet and Violet base Shuppet, at which point, fine, if you really want to, you can play this one. But until we hit Scarlet and Violet base rotation, which will be next January in Japan, next March-ish for us, or February, whenever our set comes out, when we get this rotated, fine, you can use the new one. But until then, use the one from Scarlet and Violet base. It's a bazillion times better. Good. Good. So what we've got here is a new Banette, and the new Banette is good. Now, we got two attacks here, one of which is 2 energy, 70 damage, and I don't think it's unfair to say nobody cares. But we have a first attack, Cursing Words, which... that's what the lovely Antoine Boulet is translated as. And to be fair, my limited Japanese which is getting better by the day, does tell me that is exactly what it means. Kotobar is word and Noroi is curse. Sorry for the pronunciation there. So, yeah, cursed words or cursing words. Sounds good to me. But what it does is it makes your opponent choose 3 cards from their hand and shuffle them into their deck. Here's the thing, though. That's not actually how we're going to use this card. This is not a card where you play this when your opponent's got a 7-card hand and go, ha 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 ha, now you got a 4-card hand in your face. That's not how this works. This works as now you have no hand. This is designed to take away all the remaining cards in your opponent's hand and leave them with nothing. That is how this card works. And you know what? Yeah. It can do it quite nicely. And there's a few options we've got here. I still adore this with my old friend Unfair Stamp, a card I despise playing against, but a card I end up putting in decks. Because I tend to play a lot of single prize decks, I do tend to play this card a lot, even though I really despise playing against it. But your opponent takes a prize, you play this, they go down to 2 cards in their hand, at which point you use Banette. And sure, they get to choose 3 cards from their hand and shuffle them back into their deck, except they've only got 2 cards in hand, so both of them go back into their deck, and they have a 0-card hand. I like this because it's an item card, and it's easier, I think, a lot of the time to get an item rather than a supporter or something like that. Obviously, it is an A-spec, so being an A-spec means that it's the only A-spec in your entire deck, so it's not ideal in that regard. But it's fun that it's an item that's fairly easily searchable. But don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, we have other options. The obvious one here, which I think we need to talk about, is Xerosic Machinations. Xerosic Machinations with this is beautiful, because that's a supporter card that makes your opponent discard cards from their hand until they have 3 cards remaining. Now, it is actually still a really annoying choice for your opponent, because remember, Banette is shuffling the cards back into their deck. So, let's say they got a hand of 6 cards. 3 of them are going back into their deck and they won't have access to them until they can draw them again. But the other 3 are getting discarded and they won't have access to them. They're going to be gone. They're going to be in the discard. Although we all know sometimes you put cards in the discard because you've got ways of recovering them. Put a Pokemon into your discard because you play Night Stretcher and you can search it out straight back into your hand with that. But my point is, half of them are going to end up getting discarded, half are going to go into their deck. The most important thing for our purposes here is that they have a 0-card hand. And honestly, at that point, it just comes down to what your opponent's got. Because you can plan for this. If you've got a Mew EX on the field, your opponent puts you down to a 0-card hand, use Mew, draw 3 cards, and it's a random 3 cards, but you draw for your turn. Hopefully you can play it and then draw a fresh 3. If not, you draw another 2, but that's still a 3-card hand. And of course, we talked just yesterday about the Dunsparce and how that might now become a much better card moving forward with the rotation. And what the Dunsparce does is just let you draw 3 cards. Now you then have to shuffle it back into your deck. Fine, you can reset it. I'm sure it'll work out fine. But the point is you get to draw 3 cards. And the cool thing about this is you draw for your turn, and then this is just a flat draw 3. This isn't like Mew where you draw until you've got 3 cards in your hand, and therefore every card in your hand means you draw 1 less. No. This is just draw, and I adore this. Against a deck playing something like Banette, it's going to be a problem. So look, this is not some kind of magic catch-all card. This is not going to shut down every single deck in the format. There are going to be decks that are playing stuff like the Dunsparce, playing stuff like Mew that are going to be able to get round it. As a side note, do remember that if your opponent's playing the Dunsparce, play Banette, let them draw 3. But if you can then do it again, and they haven't reset the Dunsparce on their field, then they essentially don't get to reuse the Dunsparce, and then at that point it becomes quite hilarious. Not saying it's going to work every time, but I'm saying that gives you an option. And obviously the point here is looping. That's the goal. The goal here is to try and make sure your opponent just never has cards in hand. Now, that means you're going to need to combine this with some other stuff. Maybe that's Badoo that for 0 energy stops your opponent playing item cards next turn. So you essentially use Banette, and then you switch to Badoo, try and make sure they can't do anything for a couple of turns, and then you switch back to Banette when you think they've got too many cards in hand or whatever. That could be it. Or even just use Badoo and then just keep using Xerosic's Machinations. Let him get 1 or 2 cards in hand and then keep making them discard with Xerosic and reusing Xerosic with Palpad, and then just basically making sure that they never draw into enough cards to be able to get around it. That is one option. You can combine this with something like Frostlass, so essentially the damage on your opponent's Pokemon is ticking up while you're sitting there with Frostlass putting damage on their Pokemon. That is one option, one thing that might be able to work here. Or just frustrate your opponent, choke all of their resources, and build up your big attackers on the bench, so by the time your opponent finally gets access to their hand again, it's essentially all over. There's nothing they can do at that point. They've already lost the game because they've been sitting there with no cards in hand, and you've built up an unassailable position, as an example. I don't think this is going to work in and of itself. I don't think this is just a deck. And because the problem is, if you keep making them have 0 cards in hand, they're not going to deck out because you're trying to keep the cards in their deck rather than their hand. So this isn't a Pokemon where you're trying to deck them out. You're trying to get rid of their resources. You need to have an end game. You need to be planning something while you run them out of resources. Now, one thing a lot of people are going to say in response to this is, Fezandipiti. Everyone's playing Fezandipiti. Well, are they? Because here's the thing, yeah, like everyone's playing Fezandipiti right now, don't get me wrong. The thing is, Fezandipiti works if a Pokemon was KO'd last turn. Which is why I love this with stuff like Frostlass. Puts 1 damage counter on each Pokemon that has an ability during Pokemon Checkup. Or maybe even combine it with something slightly more aggressive like Ting Lu, where you're sitting there doing damage to everything, and then switching back to bit of hand disruption when you need to, because essentially I don't want to be taking prizes and letting my opponent have access to Fezandipiti. What I really want to do here is take 6 prizes at once, or, a bunch, and put my opponent in an unassailable position while I'm frustrating their hand. It's not a perfect option, and there absolutely are ways around it. and you have to be giving up some of your attacks in order to actually make this work, there are downsides. But because we've got cards like Xerosic's Machinations, and even something like an Iono, just wait till your opponent's got 3 prizes remaining, combine Iono and Banette, boom, jobs are good 'em. Because we've got options like this, I do think you will be able to completely frustrate your opponent's resources using Banette. The question then becomes, well, what are you going to do? That's going to buy you time. How are you going to use that time to win the game? I'm going to go ahead and give this one 4 Wassies. I really like this. I don't think it's the answer. I think it's part of the puzzle. I think it buys you time to play out an end game like Frostlass or something along those lines. As for anything else, yes, we do have Banette EX. Obviously, Poltergeist will be garbage here because your goal is to have them with 0 cards in hand. So an attack that does 60 for each item card in hand is terrible. But also single energy 30 and they can't play any item cards from their hand. It's a bigger, badder Badoo. And given that I said that was an option, then a 250 HP version of that does 30 damage rather than 10 is very obviously an option as well. I'm not saying you have to. I'm just saying it could be fun. For now, I want to know what you think about this. I want to know if you're going to be going after your opponent's hand. I want to know anything you want to tell me. So let me know in the comment section, would you? Goodness! Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at Lawasi. That's where we talk about Pokemon and a whole bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all kinds of fun things. And get shoutouts on the channel, like the lovely Ray of Light, who's been a supporter of ours for a while now and is a very lovely person. So shout out to them for the support and the loveliness. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.